Good afternoon, my YouTube viewers. Crystal here. I'm here today to give you yet another solution to the Kaggle Titanic competition because today I decided I'd do a little course on analytics Vidhaya because, in between doing competitions because I thought, well, it's important to know data science, but I really would rather be doing the competitions instead of learning about data science. So I have to force myself to learn about it. And just quite by chance, on the Analytics Vidhaya course on decision trees, they gave the Titanic data set, but the Titanic data set that they gave was different from the Titanic data set that you see on Kaggle. And the reason why is because the Titanic data set, the analytics Vidhaya gave, all of the data had been cleaned up because they were just giving us the data set to illustrate how decision trees work. Well, and what a coincidence. I've been working on the Titanic data set, trying to get my score up on the leaderboard, trying my best to get my score up on the leaderboard. And so I thought that since Analytics Vidhaya is working on decision trees on the Titanic data set, I thought, well, I will look at their model and see how their model compares to the previous decision tree that I had made. And so as a result of that, I worked on that all day long today. And I wanted to share it with you to give you an alternate solution. So you can see that I just recently submitted my submission to Kaggle, and I got a 75119, which is less than my previous score of 77751. But it still was somewhere in the neighborhood. It was somewhere in the range. And that's the problem when we are developing algorithms. One little thing can tip your score like 1 or 2 points. And as I said before, I was reading an article that said that very few people get above like in the 80 percentile. And the people who are above the 80 percentile, what they do is they go into the internet and they research the survivors and they develop their model for the survivors. And that's not really what you're supposed to do, because when that happens, you're overfitting. So you can see, as I showed you this morning, all of the work that I've done to try to increase my score with the Titanic. And the highest score that I've had was 77751, but my current score is 75119. And so I thought, well, I'll show you this notebook. It's Titanic AV decision tree to let you know that it is Analytics Vidhaya. And what I'm going to do is I will share it so anybody who wants to see this solution can see it. So the first thing, so now I've shared my notebook. I've made it public, so anybody who wants to see my solution can see it now. So what I've done is I've input all my libraries, and you can see all of the libraries that I've input. Probably input some that I don't need, such as XGB classifier I don't need, but XGB classifier got in there because 1 second, I have to open the door. Okay, I'm making a video. Yeah, so XG, sorry about that. I had to open the door for somebody. So XGB classifier got in there because I was working on XGB classifier and I just never deleted the library. So the next thing I did was I imported my files, and you can see that the files were imported. The files were imported from the Kaggle drive. And then the next thing I did was I read my train file and my test file, and I printed them so you can see what they look like. You can see train info and train describe and test file, test info, and test describe. And the next thing I did was I put in some code to see if we had any null values, to see where the null values were. And so you can see that on the train file, the null values were in cabin, age, and embarked. And on the test file, the null values were cabin, age, and fare. So the next thing I did was I put in some code to replace cabin, fare, and embarked with the mode, which is the center value, and some code to replace age with the median age. And I put in some more code to see if there were any null values, and there's no more null values. So now you can see your train file, and you can see your test file, and you can see all the null values have been taken out. Next thing I did was I took the title out of the name, but we're not going to be using the title in this solution. But I thought, well, since I worked so hard to take the title out of the name, I'm not going to delete that. So I kept it in, even though it's not going to be used. But one thing that I would like you to know is there was one title called Donna, and for some reason, Donna was not did not appear on this listing of titles. But when I ran the missing values test, I found out that I had not a number, and then I went and looked up that looked up that row, and I found out Donna was in there. So I included Donna, even though it doesn't show up on the list of titles. So we ran a table to see the titles of the people on the Titanic, so you can see all that. And then we put in some code to see if we could find any missing values, and there were not any missing values. And it's always a good idea to test for missing values, because one thing, it tells you if you've done something wrong in your coding, because I found that out, that just messing up your coding is going to give you missing values. So that just assures you that your coding is as good as you can possibly get it. The next thing we did was the class, and there were 3 classes, first, second, and third. We have a chart on the class. And what we had to do was we had to put the 3 classes in the categories, and this is the coding for the categories. And then after we put the 3 classes in the categories, I went ahead and did a group by, so we can just check the categories and make sure they were okay. The next thing we did was we checked to see if there were any null values in the P class, and no, there were no null values in the P class. The next thing we did was we checked our sex, and there were 2 sexes, male and female. And what we had to do was we had to create a dictionary to assign a male and female values of 0 and 1. And we've also got a chart of the male and female values so you can see them. And the next thing we had to do was we had to put the male and female values into categories. And when we put them into categories, I did a group by to make sure that all the male and female values were there. And again, I did a test to see if there were any null values, and no, there were no null values. We checked the age and what I did, and then we have a little violin chart to show you that the most frequent age was between 20 and 40, around 30. So that tells you the most of the people who were on the Titanic at the time were around 30. And we did a chart to show you what the ages were, and this chart falls in line with the violin chart that the most frequent age of the person in the Titanic was close to 30. And we put those ages into categories of child, young adult, middle aged, and pensioner. And then I did another group by on the age so you could see how the age distribution of the people sorted out. Then we assigned each age range to a number. And then we did another test to make sure that there were not any null characters. We checked our age range again and again. There were 4 age ranges, and we checked that again. And the next thing we did was we took SIBS SP and we turned that into family. And we have a little violin chart of SIB SP, and that tells you that most of the people on the ship that night were traveling on their own. They were single because it says 0, so they didn't have anyone with them. And then what we did was we put all the SIBS SP into categories. And then we put the categories back into a group by table. The next thing we checked was PARCH, and I think PARCH means parent-child. And I know one person who is doing the solution, he combined SIB, SP, and PARCH. And I think I tried to combine SIB, SP, and PARCH, and I couldn't do it. It went into error, and I just decided not to do it. It's best just to keep things simple. And now we have violin chart of PARCH, and you can see that the people who were single were most of the people on the Titanic. We put the people in PARCH in categories, and then we did another table to see the categories that we put them in to make sure that there were no missing values. And then the next thing we did was we did the fare. We checked the fare, and then we've got a violin chart of the fare, and you can see that most of the fares were not that much, were less than 100 pounds. I categorized the fares into 0 to 99, 100 to 199, 200 to 299, 300 to 399, and 400 plus. And we put that into another group by function so you could see where all of the fares figured, and most of the fares were in the 0 to 99 range. And so what we had to do was we had to assign a dictionary for the for the range of fares, and so each range of fares was assigned a number. And then what we did was we did another test to see if there were any missing values, and no, there were no missing values. Then we tested our embark. We had CQS, were the embark locations. So what we had to do was we had to create a dictionary and assign a number to CQ and S, and we had to map that. And then after we assigned the numbers, we assigned the numbers to categories, and we categorized the CQ and S. And the next thing that we did was we checked for missing values to see if there were any missing values. So at the very end of this, what I did was I put in some more code just to see if I missed anything, just to see if there were any missing values. And whenever I was working on this solution, I did have quite a few missing values. And I had to go through and troubleshoot the system and find out where I had gone wrong, because what I had done was I had copied and pasted, and some of the column names I didn't correct, and that caused missing values. So it's always a good idea to check for missing values, and that way you can go back through and check your code and make sure that you haven't missed anything out. But you can see, and then I put in some more code to see if I had any missing values, and no, I don't have any missing values. So here's your train file, and here's your test file. Here's your train D types, and here's your test D types. And then what I did was I created a heat map so you can see how the passenger ID and all of the other variables fit in with each other. Now what I did was I did your feature selection. So I dropped name, ticket, cabin, and title on both the train file and the test file. So we didn't really need to keep the titles, but I kept them in there because I'd done so much work on them, I wasn't going to delete them. The next thing we did was we set our Y value, which is train survived. We set our features, which is class range, sex range, embarked range, age range, family range, parts range, and fare range. We set our X variable, and we set our X test variable. So you can see what X looks like. You can see it's all ones and zeros. It's binary data. And you can see what X test looks like. It's all ones and zeros. It's binary data. So the next thing we did was we split our train for testing and training. So we had X train, X validation, Y train, Y validation equals train test split, XY, stratify equals Y, test size equals .25, and random state equals 101. Then we just wanted to check the distribution of the training set, so we put some code in, and we wanted to check the distribution of the validation set, so we put some code in for that. So we checked the shape of the X train and the Y train, and we checked the shape of the X validation and the Y validation. So now what we've done is we've created a decision tree, and decision trees work on binary data. So ideally, all of the data going into the decision tree should be either a 1 or a 0. And then we fit our model. And then after we fit our model, we check the training score. The training score was close to 86%. And then we checked our validation score. It was 76%. And then we did a prediction on the validation set, and you can see all of the ones and zeros in DT model. We did a prediction on X validation, and again, you can see all the numbers, which are not ones and zeros, they're numbers. And then we calculated YPRED, and so you can see YPRED, which is numbers. The next thing we did was we did Y new, and then we put a code in there that said if the value was less than or equal to 0.7, then it was a 0. Otherwise, it's a 1. So you can see the output of YPRED, so you can see the numbers in there. So I don't know why they selected 0.7, but they did. So you can check your accuracy score, which is 0.77. And then what I did is, this is not something that was in the Analytics VidHaya training course, but I figured it out myself, because on the training course they only gave me one file, and it was the basic Titanic file where the text had been cleaned up. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to test it on the test set, because the way they do it in Kaggle and the way they do it in Analytics VidHaya is you get a training file and a testing file. So I had to figure this out by myself. So this is something that you can use. This is not something that I was given in the Analytics VidHaya course. It was just something that I figured out on myself, by myself. So that's your code. And you notice we said YPRED 1. And then the next thing we did was we used exactly the same code as in the validation set, but we called it YNew1. And you can see all the ones and zeros. And then after we did that, we put the file into a data frame and called it submission CSV. And this is your file called your data frame. And then what you would do is you would click on to edit. No, you could click on to save, because I'm not in edit at the moment, but you would click on to save. And then when you clicked on to save, you would be able to either do a short save or a long save, and depending upon whether you did a short save or a long save, you could submit your prediction to Kaggle. But I'm not going to submit my prediction to Kaggle again, because I only get 10 submissions a day, and that's not a lot when you're working on a file. So that's it. That concludes this solution, this code review of the solution. I hope that you got something out of it. I mean 75119 is not the best score that I have, but this is the score that I got from using the code from Analytics VidHaya. So obviously it's a respectable score. And I've shared my notebook, so you can use the code in the notebook if you want to. I mean, it'll get you on the leaderboard. You won't win the competition, but you will get on the leaderboard with this code. So let me know what you think about this video. And if you like my video, please like, subscribe, and share. If you like the work I do, I've left my email address down below to my PayPal account if you want to make a donation, so it'll help defray my many living expenses. And thank you so much for watching this video to the end, and I look forward to making the next one for you.